I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to stop sharing to read the bios, but I'll put them right back up.
Sure. Let,
The
if you leave the slides there, I'm going to use the first and second slide, and you can return to your first slide.
Yep, c'est beau.
Everyone, it's great to be together again. Thank you for joining this third and last of this first season of online activities for the Living Ethics International Network. This is a third panel for this inaugural year of activities for a very new network. And today's event will be moderated by Dr. Cynthia Forlini, who's adjunct professor at Deakin University and now back in Canada. And she will have the pleasure to introduce our colleagues who are part of this third panel in a second. All I wanted to do today, in addition to welcoming Cynthia and colleagues, is to simply let you know that moving forward for the next academic year, we are opening up a call for proposals to allow you, your colleagues, and everyone, as we're reaching out a great number of people, to contribute to the future of this series. We've put together a form which is available on our website. You can see the details of that in the chat. I just posted information about this. So you can access the Word form if you want to submit a proposal for an activity. That activity can be a conference of work you have undertaken. Many of you are contributing to a new volume, on living ethics. So feel free to propose to share your work and that of your close colleagues contributing with you to this volume, a dialogue, a panel, or other amazing activities you would like to do to make ethics live and grow in ways that connect to the orientation of this international network. So I simply wanted to bring this to your attention. There's also a new form for people to join the network on the website itself. So we don't have a slide on that. Thank you, Cynthia, for checking that. But the call for proposal is out and the deadline is June 19th. And it's very simple, simply your idea, the people you want to do this with, or you want to do this alone, and a bit of basic information so we can build a nice program for this network. So Cynthia, the floor is yours. I'm going to come back maybe to say a word of conclusion and simply, yeah, let you proceed. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us among the million other things that you could be doing. Thanks for being here with us. I am joining you today from the traditional lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka, and this session is dedicated to context. Right? Context is the concept that we all understand intuitively in our work and in our lives. And today our panelists are discussing context and sharing their experience with living ethics in different disciplines, methods, communities, and life stages. And so here the goal is to help you imagine living ethics in your context. So let me introduce our panelists. With us today, we have Anne-Sophie Guernon. So Anne-Sophie is a PhD candidate in anthropology at McGill University. She holds an MSc in medical anthropology from the University of Oxford. Her interdisciplinary doctoral research on gestational diabetes explores diagnostic cultures, biomedical systems, medical decision-making, and the pathologization of the human body, the female body. Her research interests include diabetes, chronic illness, metabolism, public health, bioethics, and the use of AI in medicine. So welcome, Anne-Sophie. We have with us as well Dr. Judy Illes, who is professor of neurology at the University of British Columbia, a distinguished university scholar, UBC distinguished scholar in neuroethics, and the director of Neuroethics Canada. Dr. Illes is a pioneer in neuroethics and has not only placed the field on the world map of research, but has tirelessly trained the generation that leads it today and many of those who will lead it tomorrow. In recognition of her leadership, Dr. Illes was awarded the Order of Canada, our country's highest recognition of its citizens, in 2017. Welcome, Judy. Next is Dr. Félix Pageau, who completed a master's degree in philosophy in 2019. He is also a full researcher at the Center of Excellence in Aging in Quebec and at VITAM, the Center of Research in Sustainable Health. Dr. Pageau is head of ethics and health access in the Institute of Applied Ethics at Laval University. He also had the opportunity to study as a fellow at the prestigious McLean Center for Medical and Clinical Ethics in Chicago. His areas of study are medical assistance in dying, euthanasia, consent to care, and robotics in geriatrics. Didn't mention that he is an internist geriatrician as well. Welcome, Felix. And our fourth panelist is Dr. Katja Kühlmeyer, who is a senior researcher at the Institute of Ethics, History, and Theory of Medicine at the Ludwig Maximilians University, Munich in Germany. And through research, teaching, and the design of scientific events, she aims to contribute to the translation of medical ethics in practice. So you see that we have with us so much experience. Welcome. Sorry, I forgot to welcome you, Katja, as well. So we have so much experience, and I want to get into the discussion right away. So let me share the questions so that everybody can have them in front of us. Voila. Okay. Yeah, our panelists, got through all of them. Amazing question. And our first question we're starting with, and I know it's a burn everybody too, and that's, what do we mean when we talk about context in living ethics, and why is context important? To start us off, I'd like to invite Anne-Sophie. What's your take?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I feel like as an anthropologist that context is everything. So in 1999, the anthropologist Roy Dilly said that context he describes as a set of connections construed as relevant to someone or to something or to a particular problem. And this process yields an explanation, a sense, or an interpretation of the object so connected. In fact, if you read any ethnography, the first couple pages, or in fact, the first kind of chapter, is dedicated to kind of situating the reader and explaining the context in which these observations took place. So you might ask, why is it so important, and why do we go through the trouble of doing this and contextualizing? Well, because anthropology, and I argue much like living ethics, is about being grounded in the experiences of people in a given location at a given time, and that the connections that one can draw between these things. Another anthropologist, Clifford Geertz, in 1988 said that the work of an ethnographer was to convince the reader about being there. So he argued that the value of an anthropologist's claims came from their ability to be convincing that they were actually there in that context and that they had successfully penetrated the field. So basically arguing and convincing us that they're a reliable and, trustworthy source of information due to their presence and experience of being there in that context. So ethnographic material is really situated, meaning that it's applicable to the situation in which, the data or the information was gathered. So it means that the people that are present, the environment, the time in which it happens, and the events that took place, etc. And for me, this is also really the essence of what living ethics is and what makes it so novel and impactful. So as we know, living ethics is about, being attentive to human experience, and I believe that you can't really separate human experience from the context in which it happens. So paying special attention to what stakeholders have to say about a situation, how they feel about it, how they reflect on it. Well, that is all context dependent. So I think we cannot underestimate the importance of context when we talk about living ethics.
Thanks so much, Anne-Sophie. Next, I'd like to invite Katja to share some thoughts on context.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be among these esteemed colleagues and to talk about living ethics and how it can be enacted in our work. And I think the question is really like a difficult one. And Anne-Sophie already gave a lot of insight into what context could mean if you do empirical research. So I try to rather grasp to provide you with a metaphor. So if you take a picture and maybe you focus on something that you want to highlight in your picture, you focus the lens on something. Context is everything that is surrounding this focus and even goes beyond what is visible in the picture. So it can be more than meets the eye initially. And when you think about moral situations, context could be something that changes how you evaluate something. If you think about a case and you vary the case with regard to the age of a patient or with regard to the illness, the severity of the illness, for example, with regard to specificities of the case, maybe also the evaluation of the context, the evaluation of the situation changes. So context matters with regard to ethical judgment making. And living ethics as a specific form of ethics is supposed to be lived and to live on. So it has to be enacted in certain practice areas, and practice areas can also be contexts that are relevant in this regard. And when doing living ethics, we can give more context to a moral deliberation by providing theory, by providing insights into principles or concepts that inform principles. And moral theories could be used as tools to highlight certain aspects of a situation. So that could also be some kind of context that can be provided to a situation. So it can be a lot of things that might be visible to the person in the situation or invisible. And since living ethics is a stance and not a moral theory in itself, the context is extremely important for the implementation of living ethics. I would say living ethics is a form of contextualized ethics. And this is really special about it. I haven't encountered it before.
Thank you, Katja. I'd like to invite Judy next to share some thoughts on context.
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you, Eric and colleagues, for this really wonderful series. I think I can be very brief, especially with Anne-Sophie and Katja's remarks preceding me. For me, context is, 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. And I think each alone and together define context and are really inseparable from one another. in and for ethics and the ethics context and ethics space, whether we're talking about Euro-Western ethics or indigenous ethics, each of these W's, who, what, when, where, and why, are both independent and intersecting. And I think the route to understanding each of these phenomena in the context of the cultural approaches they bring to the table is by understanding each and respecting each for their strengths and also where there are places for growth, especially as they may intersect in a very contextual and dynamic way, which is for me what the context of living ethics really brings to us and to this discussion.
Thank you, Judy. Felix, please, would you round out this question for us?
Yes, so thank you for having me today. I'm really pleased to have this discussion with this esteemed colleagues. And I'm a little bit shy after all that has been said, since I'm not an anthropologist, neither a psychologist nor a neuroethicist, but still I'm a physician. And in medicine, we kind of use this idea of psychosocial, and now cultural, even spiritual aspects to a patient care to add on what we already were doing before, concentrating mostly on biology, but now with the aging population and the westernization of the world for good and bads, but we see that in medicine, other type of medicine other than classical medical models are very needed for, and it's interesting that even the word health organization changed their definition of health recently. Well, what's not that recent, but still they reinforced that definition recently in the Constitution, stating that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So that's why I think in the first place I was interested into ethics and completed a master's degree in philosophy, just to understand a little bit more other aspects of health. What does that mean? What it's important also for the patient under my care. So as a physician, geriatrician, also in a very ageist culture in the Western world, we have to, I think, for other perspective on aging, Global South mostly have a view on aging that is very different from what we see in the Western culture, mostly what we see in Canada and now the US. What's happening is also very context-based. So the importance of context in medicine in general, but also in ethics and in clinical ethics is more and more important. And I think living ethics is a way to recognize that importance. And even environment now with global health, One Health is very important for medicine in general, and the vulnerable population that are aging or the older person is always or more often impacted by global warming or climate change. So it's very important to recognize all these aspects of the human experience of living, and living ethics is important, and context is even more important now, I think, for living ethics. Yeah.
Thanks, Felix. And thanks everyone for discussing your commitment to understanding that world around the, either empirical, conceptual, or ethical question that we're all interested in. Everyone has kind of already shown their colors, a little bit of the perspective that they're going to present. And now our second question is really delving a little bit more into that. So talk to us, please, about in what context have you adopted a living ethics stance? How did you do it? What was the result? So we're looking at kind of the how and some of the specifics of the context that you've looked at. Judy, would you start us off, please?
All right, I'll dig in here with an example of where really on a daily basis I use a living ethics stance, although not solely, but definitely in a very dynamic way, using the word dynamic that I referred to earlier. And then I'm going to put an example on the table where I'm curious what our other panelists and what the audience thinks. because I'm a bit stumped myself. So to begin with the first example where I have a living ethics sort of on the go, and that is in the context of an administrative responsibility that I have the privilege of holding at this day, and that is as chair of the International Brain Initiative. This was an initiative that was started about 8 years ago now, and the goal was to bring together all, at the time, 7 of the large-scale cross-national initiatives around the world. This included Canada, the United States, Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, and I'm sure I'm missing one there. And today we are a consortium of 11 nations. So we actually cover all continents of the world today. And our goal is to bring together leaders of these national initiatives in dialogue regularly on a monthly basis, and then at key critical meetings to speak about our national priorities, where we reside with our priorities, and also how we can bring national priorities together in collaboration to really advance neuroscience, global neuroscience, in a geopolitically free way. And this is where really ethics comes in and living ethics comes in, because each of these nations share values and priorities, particularly around advancing brain health, alleviating the burden of neurologic and psychiatric disease, and so forth. Yet each of the nations may have and does have different kinds of ethical rules and regulations. Some are shared, some are different. And living ethics enables me and my colleagues around the world, including Tony Hanan, who's co-chair in Melbourne, Australia, to really think about how we can best coordinate our priorities and our values in a very fruitful and successful cross-national global collaboration for neuroscience. And I feel that this example is just, it is alive. It is truly a living ethic on a daily basis. And through the lens of living ethics, along with others, that is respecting the ethics that belong to the other nations, we actually have been able to come together and launch major initiatives. Everyone can look at the International Brain Initiative website, see what we are advancing, global collaboration in fellowships. We have 16 fellowships open now for young people to come and make exchanges in different countries. And that can only be achieved when we look mutually at each other's scientific priorities and ethical values, and can come together and to achieve the goals that we set out together. So that's the International Brain Initiative. And I also see that Marianne Bakani, who is our operations director, is on this Zoom with us. And she too lives living ethics with the rest of us on a daily basis to advance these goals. So that's my example of how I've adopted, or where I've adopted, living ethics. But where I have a question for all, and we can see if anyone's interested in picking it up, Cynthia, or not, is that the International Neuroethics Society just had its annual meeting in Munich, Germany last week. It was a phenomenal success, led by Marcello Ienca and Philip Kühlmeyer. And one of the most interesting sessions that I had the privilege to attend was led by Andrea Lavazzi from the the Italian Society for Neuroethics, and it was on organoids. And one of the questions that came up, and in fact was a feature of this session on organoids, was organoid intelligence. And of course, organoids are clusters of small cells derived from stem cells, and some believe that they have an intelligence that through continued emerging technology and scientific advances will realize some form of intelligence, human or not. And my challenge to the presenters and also to the audience was whether we're really talking about intelligence, and can a cluster of cells that, for example, may be able to play a game of Pong, is that really intelligence, or is that some other form of cellular behavior that we can recognize, appreciate, and call something? But in the absence of intuition, self-reflexivity, and accountability, whether we can really call that intelligence. And I have been trying to place living ethics in this context and answer that question, and I don't come up with an answer yet. And I'm anxious to see whether this group can help me think this through. So that's me, Cynthia. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. And of course, everyone is open to answer the question. Also, if we have answers in the chat for those attending, they're much welcome. So thanks, Judy. Next, I'd like to invite Félix to share some of your experience with living ethics.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure I will answer Judy's question now, but I'm kind of thinking about it. It's quite interesting from a physician perspective and having done biology and all. But going back to living ethics and why did I adopt this stance of living ethics? I was first seduced by the idea of human flourishing and then curious. And then I was a bit challenged by the idea of human flourishing in geriatrics. So how could we apply human flourishing to people suffering with dementia or problems with mobility? And the question of withering comes to mind first, probably to most when we talk about geriatrics. So losing capacity in being at the end of life. But then we've done a small pilot study in Quebec City. And now we have a bigger project called the Living Lab on living ethics and quality of care in geriatrics. And what came out of that first pilot project, is that yes, flourishing is important. Yes, even at the end of life, you can flourish as a human being and give fruits, even like past the flower state. Then you're at the fruitful state when you can give back what you receive. And as children of someone living with dementia, also you can give back to your older parent living with the disease. So I think human flourishing can apply and should. I can say also, I can say that it should apply to geriatrics or aging as a whole. And as maybe going back to Judy's question, my question was also, when did we start to be old? When are we aging? And are these organoids already old or dying when they come alive? And the question of intelligence is a great question, because in geriatrics, what we always have this question with patient having various cognitive problems, either social intelligence or problem with language, or different type of problems that comes with dementia. So I think, how do we define intelligence? That would be my follow-up questions to Judy's question. So not answering, but asking one more question, as an ethicist should do, I think.
Thank you, Felix. And there's always a mark of a really great discussion when more questions come up. So I want to take a quick pause to say that after we finish discussion of those questions, we're going to open up for a few questions from the audience. So please do get them into the Q&A if they're already thinking of some questions. And Sophie, can I get you to continue our discussion on living ethics in your context, please?
Yeah, gladly. And again, I don't know if I'm willing to venture out into providing a full assertive answer to Judy's question, but it's in there. I'm thinking about it for sure. But I think maybe my experience trying to implement living ethics might be a little bit different, because I'm still very early on in my academic career, so I'm still a PhD candidate. But for me, I guess the experience that I've had with the Living Ethics Project, and I really did want to kind of implement that into the construction of my PhD project. So kind of thinking about the methods that I was using, and trying to have a little bit more of a collaborative take on the methods that I was using for my project, and trying to let the stakeholders express a little bit more agency. So again, trying to keep that a little bit more in line with a living ethics stance. So in an effort to do this, I kind of decided to adopt a diary interview study as part of my research on gestational diabetes. So I asked patient participants to keep a diary. where they could write about their daily lives, living with and managing their gestational diabetes during their pregnancy. And these diary entries actually proved to be more raw and kind of profound than any interview that I could have conducted. And actually pairing that diary data with the interview data actually gives so much more life and depth to the information. And I actually think that for the patients, they feel like this diary is somewhere where they can write without fear of being judged or not having to provide kind of acceptable answers. You know, they're free from the gaze of medicine. This is not going to affect or have any impact on their care. So I kind of came to realize that maybe this is one of the places where my research might have an unexpected impact, would be in the lives of the patients that I encountered. And I've started to kind of conduct postpartum interviews with the moms that were participating in my study. And one of them actually shared that the diary and having a space for her to express her feelings and her moment, her experiences in the moment was actually really one of the most valuable experiences during her pregnancy. And she says, and I quote, "So to have an outlet where somebody who cares and somebody who's in a place to do something about this is reading, it's such a valuable thing, right? And when you're having a hard time, you know, you're not just shouting into the void. This is going to be hopefully helpful for someone in the future. And that kind of thing is really cool." End quote. So I think that this kind of incentive represents the living ethics stance, you know, in our desire to kind of encourage meaningful participation from participants, and again, letting their voice, their experience, their context shine. And it's allowed me to have kind of a deeper look at kind of the choices that they make during their pregnancy, and also kind of a fuller picture of kind of the moral dilemmas or internal monologues that they have with themselves when making these decisions. You know, am I gonna have this cookie that I'm really craving and that I really want? Am I gonna go on a walk as I should do and as I'm prescribed to do, but I'm exhausted from my day of work? So yeah, kind of getting a better look at the kind of moral, maybe ethical reflections that they have on their day-to-day because of their GDM diagnosis. Yeah, and I think I'm kind of grateful that I had this kind of living ethics stance and mentality going into the design of my project, because I think it's going to be definitely the better for it. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Anne-Sophie, for sharing that example and those reflections about really the difference that you think it made. Katja?
Well, these have been very rich presentations. I really would like to discuss every topic that you brought to the table. But what I bring with me today is a project that I conducted together with Dr. Ariel Kashko, and they are also with us in this Zoom meeting today. And for the Living Ethics edited volume that Eric already mentioned, we wrote a chapter. So we rather provided theory of living research ethics. And the starting point for this project was actually the International Living Ethics Workshop in Montreal, where we thought, well, how could living ethics change the way we are going about ethics today in research, but also in like practical encounters? And I was wondering whether my position in a review board for ethical issues in research at the medical faculty was an area of my professional work where we are actually very far away from a living ethics. Regulatory approaches to research ethics are based on fear and a protectionist system, and fear-based and protectionist system, and installing mandatory reviews of designs of research are very static. They are very distant. The reviewers and the researchers are very distant from each other. And what reviewers basically do is they have like a rule-based approach to ethics. They check whether the design that researchers present to them that they want to implement in practice, whether they are in line with the law, with professional codes of conduct, with ethical codes like the Declaration of Helsinki. So it's all very much, in a way, static and fixed and confined to the application of rules. And we were wondering in our chapter whether we could broaden the perspective of research ethics, because we realized that sometimes even researchers who are only familiar with that approach and not have had the chance to get like bioethics training or attend a bioethics conference, they are pretty much like taking this experience with a review board as, well, that's ethics. They don't even know that it is like a field of scholarship, which is pretty much not about applying rules, but rather discussing the norms that should be applied to certain situations. So at first we were like motivated by these like negative experiences and worries that ethics, when you only think about this regulatory approach, is like misconstrued. And we wanted to encourage a different perspective, where we rather wanted to highlight the benefits of engaging with other people and discussing your moral experience with them, bringing in the research participants, communities, and the society as a whole into the discussion of moral issues, and not like limiting research ethics to the phase of planning, but also provide new ways of opening up moral spaces to discuss the actual implementation of research, like questions that come up later on that you do not anticipate and that are like super difficult to solve. So pretty much, I think Anne-Sophie's example of what the diaries meant for her participants is something that you cannot anticipate. You have to ask them, to engage with them to actually realize that. Or if you do a research on organoids, maybe this idea of, can they be actors in a way? What moral status might they have if they act in a certain way? And of course, these perspectives are often anthropocentric. So we think we as humans are like the bar that they should be measured against. So maybe they have like something that is valuable in itself, and we don't call it intelligence, but we give it another term that also can give us an idea of their moral status. So these questions, they don't come up when you plan a research. They come up when you're really engaged with your research. And we wanted to provide a concept for a living research ethics that has like room and resources and capacities and measures to address this part of research ethics. And we hope that maybe by envisioning such an approach, somebody picks it up, puts it into practice, because so far it's not a lived living ethics. It's rather an idea what living ethics could mean in that context. And maybe then later on we will have like more elaborate and more experience with actual examples of how that could benefit researchers, on top of getting like an opinion of whether your design is in line with ethical requirements.
Thank you, Katja. What I heard across the board was living ethics providing an opportunity for connection, some new connections, deeper connections, broader connections. That's really, really great to hear. So it is time for a brief Q&A stop. We have two in the Q&A. We'll go in first in Best Dressed. Abu Senghor asks, can all contexts lead to the adoption of the living ethics approach? Is it still relevant to use living ethics as a stance in the context of disease management or the experience of disease? Jump in, anybody, please.
Could you maybe, okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Anne-Sophie.
No, I was going to say if you can repeat or reformulate
Yeah, just the beginning maybe, but
question.
yeah.
Right, so from what Abu, would you like to ask your question or perhaps provide some specifics? Judy?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and provide my perspective, which is that I think living ethics is so ubiquitous that it absolutely applies everywhere, all the time, to all contexts. And in particularly in the context of disease, it's profoundly applicable because it places the person and the patient front and center in any discourse. So to answer Abdu's question, my answer is yes to both parts of the question.
And I was about to say, also as a physician, circling back to what I said for the first question, answering the first question, the idea of holistic care is, I think, comes along with living ethics, or the idea of considering, yes, biology, because humans are living beings, but not only biology, also cultural, spiritual, psychological aspects. So from the shift to cure, from cure to care. So as I mentioned, medicine was pretty focused on the idea of curing the disease or curing an illness. And then we realized that, yes, we can do that for certain disease or illnesses, but then cultural aspects, spiritual aspects are also very important while caring for someone, especially in geriatrics. Going back to my field of medicine, the idea of having the family or the caregivers also close to the patient when we're caring for the patient, and the cultural aspect of ageism. This is more present in North America and Canada in general. It's also important to consider when we're talking about geriatric care. So all these aspects are very important. And I think living ethics is a broader way of seeing ethics and considering all these aspects, all the holistic aspects of care. And the first shift from cure to care, but then how do you define care and what's important for a good care plan? And I think living ethics is definitely the way to go, considering human flourishing and all the aspects of human flourishing in care.
Thanks, Felix. I have a specification from everyone. Maybe, Felix, you can continue on your thought, because he says, I just want to know if there's any limitation in terms of excluding people with some specific diseases that do not allow the interaction with other stakeholders. So in your experience with people with dementia, is that something, does living ethics still have a space there for people who can't communicate?
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think it's still important, not only for the person, but for the people caring for the person, especially in these time after COVID and everything that has happened in our healthcare systems worldwide. I think to bring back the idea that we, yes, can still flourish even if we're caring for the most vulnerable, and that money is not always there and people are not always there as well. I think, yes, it's very important, especially for people that have difficulty communicating. And there are different ways of helping people or getting to a way of having their 2 cents on their problems. I mean, we have in geriatrics many tools to understand what the patient is saying or wants to say. So yes, it's not always easy, but I think human living ethics put that forward, saying that, yeah, we have to collaborate, co-create, and also imply people living with the disease we're caring for. So I think, yes, it's even more important when people are difficulty communicating, just to make their voice louder when they cannot themselves make it loud.
And find a way, right, to be more creative about engaging with those people who, can't communicate traditionally in our traditional research method.
Yeah, it's part of living. I think when I'm saying that, I'm based on this idea of I'm just having the word in French, ergotherapy, but how do you adapt the environment? Thank you, occupational therapy, exactly. How do you adapt the environment to the person? Handicap is not person being handicapped or having handicap, it's the environment that causing the handicap. So that's probably, a better way to answer the question. Like this occupational therapy framework, I think it's very interesting and we should use it more, and living ethics kind of apply it in many ways.
Thanks, Felix. Before we move on to the next question, we do have an answer to Judy's question from Himanshi Sali, who says, to pitch on Dr. Illes' question, since intelligence can be defined as the ability to learn, understand, and make judgments or have opinions that are based in reason, that's a Cambridge, the reference is Cambridge, and if the cell clusters are not capable of intuition, reasoning, sentiment, it may be probable not to classify organoids as intelligent beings.
I'm just
Right.
thinking about this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, Felix, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about this mushroom thing in Japan. Do you remember? Have you heard of this? Like the Tokyo, I think, metro lines are designed. Have been designed with the help of a mushroom because the mushroom was able to kind of make its way through to the nutrients in a very efficient way, and that's how they designed the old system. So trophism, like the plant going to the sun and the roots going to the ground and kind of going around the stones in the ground. I think it's an interesting way. Is that a primitive form of intelligence? Because yes, maybe it's not reasoning, but still it's moving around, reacting to the environment, being efficient. No, I don't know. So a mushroom is more intelligent than urban designers. Maybe I don't know. That's a pretty tough statement, but I don't know. That's what they did in Tokyo as. Yeah.
I can't follow the example of the Tokyo train system. It brings living ethics alive at a whole other dimension.
There's one more. Judy, did you want to say something about the answer?
No, I think
Sure.
Felix actually. So what I was going to jump in and say. So how does living ethics bring us to that conclusion, which I happen to agree with, but I think Felix's example just kind of homes us in there. So I'm going to let you go on to maybe Michel Stanton's question, which is really poignant.
I was going to save that for, we have one more question, and I was going to save that for our second round, but we can do it now. Michel Stanton-Jean asks, Katja has raised a lot of interesting questions about the issue concerning the process of implementing a living ethics stance in a group. I think that this is an essential question. If people are driven by fear and regulations, how can you move them to a living ethics stance?
If I can jump in very quickly as well, I kind of share Michelle's question or reflection, and it's something that I face a lot working as a social scientist, but in the medical sphere. I find that I often bump against, the kind of I use the analogy of like fitting a square peg into a round hole, is that, sometimes social science doesn't fit the model that is kind of expected when you're working in healthcare settings. And I think it does kind of constrain sometimes how free you can be with form. And especially when you're interacting with doctors, and I mean, rightfully so, are mindful of protecting their patients and protecting, the privacy and confidentiality and all that. So you have kind of all of these institutional barriers that are there for I guess a good reason, to want to protect the patient and the hospital, but then also in an inadvertent way also kind of prevent how creative you can be with including participation. And it's something that I've struggled with in my research, because I've thought about, what about co-authorship? These diaries that I'm using, or I'm not the one that wrote those, someone else wrote that, but they're a patient and I can't say who they are. I can't say their name. So even that is something that I kind of struggle with, wanting to be fully cooperative and for this to be a true partnership, but there's institutional or, ethical, the ethical board won't let me say who these people are. So I share Michelle's sentiments that there's this kind of fear and the regulations do kind of sometimes maybe inhibit living ethics from, being implemented in its full potential, especially I think in healthcare settings. Yeah.
So maybe to elaborate a bit on our chapter and what we did with this circumstance or this context, we were looking at clinical ethics support services, for example, as an inspiration to research ethics support. And I think that that hasn't been considered yet because we are so much focused on research ethics sports that we think research ethics is like covered by them. But I think we should think rather about different structures that complement their work and offer researchers throughout their research endeavor spaces where they can like have trust in the process and don't have to be afraid that they are barred from conducting their research or that their research could be stopped. So it has to be a setting where built on trust, and you have to like make sure that you can maintain the confidentiality within the consultation. And then maybe you can bring in experienced researchers from similar fields and facilitate a discussion where different perspectives can be heard. Maybe you can also bring in like exemplary persons who stand for the participants and open up the perspective and not limit it to the perspective of experts. And you can have like real dialogue that maybe gives like the groundwork for finding new solutions to pending problems that were not able to be anticipated. So this is just one example of how we should think differently about research ethics and not only limit our thoughts to what research ethics boards are doing and how they are, for example, misconstruing socio-empirical research because they are not very much familiar with it.
Felix, please.
Yeah, just quickly, if I can add, just giving my 2 cents because I'm not doing research on research ethics, but still as a researcher, I'm always a little bit confronted when they call it research ethics because to me, it's more like research conformity. And maybe we are in the need for research ethics also, but sometimes it gets mixed up and probably the word is not well chosen. And also, it's a little bit like code of conduct that sometimes I call code of ethics for a physician, which is not exactly the same. Yes, we need rules, but then we need also spaces to reflect on our practices. So I think we probably need to change the name and create something new also. But yeah, just my 2 cents on this topic.
Research ethics gets everybody's blood pumping. We have we're going to have a couple minutes at the end of the session. So if you do have any more questions, please do put them in the Q&A. But for now, panel, can living ethics create results and solutions that are meaningful outside the context in which they've been created? And does this transferability matter? Over to you.
Cynthia, who's up?
Judy?
Oh,
Anybody who wants to get in first.
oh, I'm in. And so I'm excited about this question for 2 reasons. One is I a little bit want to redirect the notion of transferability, which to me is a very unidirectional phenomenon. And I'm reminded of the work that Eric Racine and I did probably 2 decades ago now, where we talked about multi-directionality rather than unidirectionality or even bidirectionality in terms of the transfer of information and dissemination of knowledge and exchange of understanding. So, but anyway, transferability, so I'm going to redefine it in this context as maybe generalizability in bringing together this notion that knowledge can go in many, many different directions, not just 1 or 2. And then I want to put it in the context of a paper that I wrote with many co-authors, but the co-lead author was Melissa Perrault at the University of Guelph. It's a citizen of the Métis First Nation. And we published a paper in February in Nature called Two-Eyed Seeing for Neuroscience. And we put two-eyed seeing and neuroscience together in the context of, or we framed it in the context of epistemic humility and trust. And then we use these concepts in the case examples of disability and migration suicide, and the environment as examples of how humility and trust come together and can coexist in a two-eyed seeing framework where Euro-Western and Indigenous concepts, worldviews about neuroscience can really come together and be co-located towards a better understanding of brain and mind and wellness and health and disease. And of course, neurotechnology comes into there with its risk of sort of colonialism, and but it's sort of embedding living ethics as we think about these concepts. We can really see how different ethical stances and worldviews and perspectives, particularly for the brain, which of course is my space, my primary space, can come together. And so the transferability goes in all directions, in this case, Indigenous and Euro-Western, but not exclusively so. And so in this context, I think transferability equals multidirectionality equals generalizability.
Thanks, Judy. I'm going to just take the chair's privilege to get back to the questions in the 5 minutes that we have left so that we can close the session. And that's from Stanislav Birko. It can be claimed that the purpose of the word ethics is ethics washing. So in that sense, ethics as critiqued by Felix is doing what it's meant to do. So I guess it's a comment more than a question. Does anybody want to respond to that or get back to a quick answer on transferability? Okay.
Yeah, maybe I can answer quickly the claim. Yeah, I think words are important. Yeah, sometimes with how things are said makes a difference, and people get mixed up between ethics and other kind of things that are not very ethical, like ethic washing. I agree.
Good. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thanks to all of you, and over to Eric to close the session.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was just posting a comment, a concluding comment in the chat. Multitasking. Thank you so much, dear colleagues, Judy, Felix, Katja, and Sophie, and Cynthia for chairing, as well as all others involved in this first series of online activities for the Living Ethics International Network. I think it's been great meetings, great opportunities, a lot of interesting ideas and experiences and thoughts have been shared in this burgeoning new series. And I think what we saw today is a lot of new questions and insights to be tapped into and explored. So on that note, I'm going to remind everyone that we have an open call for proposals. So if you want to explore some of these ideas, or explore other ideas, or bring other questions, and organize something that connects to living ethics in a really broad and open way, we have an easy to access form to submit proposals before June 19th. And we will get back with proposers of events to organize a series for next year. Otherwise, the website for the network is now active. And thanks to Isadora, who's just beside me, we have an amazing functional website and newsletter. We have a second edition of the newsletter coming up. If you have news, opportunities, and other good stuff to share, we are there for that in your service. And on that note, I'm going to wish everyone, I guess, a good, if you're in this hemisphere, good summer, or I guess good winter coming up, a good summer season, because already it is at least here at the end of the academic year in sight already. And we know it's tremendously pressured time for a lot of people. So again, thank you for being with us, for contributing to the panel, and thanks again to Cynthia. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.